I had just returned home to Los Angeles after my first year of college. To be honest, I wasn't looking forward to it. My life at school had been a whirlwind of new experiences, new people, and challenges. I was used to being independent, managing my own schedule, and having control over my life. Coming back home felt like stepping back into a different world, one I no longer felt a part of. My mom, Laura, was always busy with her work. She had always been someone who valued her career, but lately, I felt like her focus was entirely on that. I could never remember a time when she was fully present at home, listening, supporting me. It was as though the space between us was growing wider with every passing day. My stepfather, Mike, was rarely around either. He worked long hours, and when he wasn't working, he kept to himself, often buried in his own thoughts. He was a man of few words, a man who rarely showed emotion, and as far as I could tell, he didn't seem particularly interested in engaging with me. But when I walked through the front door of our house, everything felt different. It was strange. Mike greeted me at the door, just like he always did, but this time, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was as if he was trying to connect. I hadn't seen him try like this before. "How was school?" he asked, standing in the doorway with a slight smile, his tone softer than usual. I was caught off guard by his warmth. "It was fine," I answered, offering a half smile. I didn't know how to react to this sudden shift. It wasn't like him to show interest in me, at least not like this. He nodded slowly, watching me closely. "It must have been tough, being away for so long," he said, almost thoughtfully. "I know it's different when you're living on your own." I shrugged. "I guess," I mumbled, unsure of how to continue. He seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "Well, I'm glad you're back. If you ever need anything, just ask." His words were simple, but the way he said them caught my attention. I had always viewed Mike as an outsider in my life, someone who wasn't really part of my world. But now, with his unexpected concern, something shifted in the air. I didn't know what to think. The next few days felt a little awkward. I tried to avoid him as much as I could, but Mike continued to show up in places I didn't expect him to be. He would ask me how I was doing, offer to help me with unpacking my things, or suggest we watch a movie together. I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate his kindness, but it felt forced, like he was trying too hard to make up for something I couldn't quite understand. One evening, after dinner, Mike approached me again, this time as I was sitting on the couch, flipping through my phone. I didn't hear him come in, but I felt his presence behind me. "How are you settling back in?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was a hint of concern in his tone. I didn't know why, but his question caught me off guard. "Fine, I guess," I said quickly, not looking up from my phone. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I didn't know how to make small talk with him. I had never been close to Mike, and it felt strange to even have a conversation like this with him. He stood there for a moment, watching me, and I could feel his eyes on me. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable. "You know," he continued, breaking the silence, "if you ever want to talk, or if you need someone to hang out with, I'm here." I finally looked up at him, surprised by his offer. I wasn't used to hearing Mike say things like that. Sure, we had spent time together before, but it had always been when my mom was around, and the atmosphere was different then. This felt more personal, more intentional. "Thanks," I said, though I wasn't sure what to make of his words. "Anytime," he said, before turning and walking away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The rest of the evening passed without much interaction, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Mike's behavior wasn't like anything I had ever experienced with him before. He wasn't the distant figure he had always been, and that bothered me. I didn't know if I was overthinking it, or if there was more to his attention than I was willing to admit. The next few days felt strange. I kept finding myself thinking about what had happened between Mike and me. His sudden concern, his desire to spend time together, it was all so out of character for him. I didn't know how to react to it. On one hand, I was grateful for the attention, especially considering how distant my mom had been, but on the other, I was uncomfortable. It felt like something was changing, and I wasn't sure if I liked it. Every time I saw Mike, I felt a sense of unease. He would smile at me more often, ask about my day, and sometimes even offer to help with things around the house. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it, but it felt strange. There was something in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just concern, it was something else. I started noticing the way he would look at me, lingering just a little too long. It was subtle, but it was there, and I couldn't stop noticing it. One evening, when my mom had to work late, I found myself alone with Mike again. I wasn't sure how it happened, but we ended up in the living room together. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching it. We sat in silence for a while, and I could feel the tension between us, thick and uncomfortable. "Do you ever miss college?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah, sometimes. It's a lot different from here. Everything moves so fast there." Mike nodded, his gaze lingering on me. "I can imagine. You were away for a while. Must have been hard to adjust." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him as more than just my stepdad. There was a quiet intensity in his expression that I hadn't noticed before. I quickly looked away, trying to push the thought from my mind. "I'm fine," I said, my voice almost too loud in the silence. "It's just different." Mike didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted closer to me on the couch, his body a little too close for comfort. My heart began to race. I could feel his presence beside me, his warmth, and I hated how aware I was of him in that moment. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "You seem a little distant. If there's anything you need to talk about, you know I'm here." I felt a strange twist in my stomach. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them. There was a certain tenderness to his voice that made me feel vulnerable. He was my stepdad. He was supposed to be distant, not someone who cared this much about how I was feeling. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," I repeated, more firmly this time. "Thanks." But Mike didn't move away. He stayed there, close to me, his body still angled toward mine. I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes were focused on me, how the space between us felt charged, like there was something unsaid between us. I swallowed, trying to calm my racing heart. "You don't have to pretend," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's okay if you need someone." I shifted uncomfortably, trying to avoid his gaze. Why was this happening? Why was he acting like this? I didn't want to acknowledge it, but a part of me was starting to like the attention. It was wrong, I knew that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us. And it scared me. I stood up quickly, almost too quickly. I should probably get some sleep. It's been a long day. Mike didn't stop me. He simply nodded and stood up as well. "All right. Just remember, if you ever need anything, I'm here." I nodded again, avoiding his eyes as I quickly left the room. My heart was still pounding in my chest as I walked down the hallway to my room. I closed the door behind me, trying to steady my breathing. What was happening? Why was I reacting like this? Mike was just my stepdad, someone I should have been able to talk to like any other family member. So why did it feel like everything between us was changing? I lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I couldn't deny it anymore. I was starting to see Mike in a different light, and that terrified me. The next few days felt like they were dragging on. I couldn't escape the tension that was slowly building between Mike and me. Every time I saw him, it was like everything I had tried to push to the back of my mind came rushing forward. I knew something had changed. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but I knew things were no longer the same. His presence, his attention, his words, everything about him was starting to feel different, and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to keep busy. I spent time with my friends, went out to get away from the house, and focused on my studies. Anything to distract myself from the growing sense of discomfort that followed me around whenever Mike was near. But no matter what I did, it was always there, lurking in the background. One afternoon, after spending the entire day out with a friend, I came home to find the house empty. I wasn't sure where my mom had gone, but I was thankful for the solitude. I made my way into the kitchen, hoping to grab a quick snack and relax for a while. But as soon as I stepped into the room, I saw Mike standing by the counter, fiddling with something. The familiar, almost suffocating feeling in the pit of my stomach returned. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice light, as if everything was perfectly normal. "You're home early. How was your day?" I forced a smile, trying to hide the unease I felt. "It was fine. Just out with Jane. Nothing special." Mike looked over at me, and for a moment, I saw that look again. That soft, intense gaze that made my stomach twist. "I'm glad you're getting out. It's important to take breaks, especially with all that studying you're doing." "Yeah, I know," I mumbled, not wanting to get into it. I grabbed a granola bar from the counter, trying to keep the conversation light. He stepped closer, his eyes still fixed on me. "I just want you to know, Emily, I'm here for you. If you ever need someone to talk to, I want to be that person. I know it can't be easy, being away from home and then coming back with all these changes." I nodded quickly, feeling a lump form in my throat. I knew he was trying to help, but it felt too personal, too invasive. I didn't need him to be this involved in my life, or at least, that's what I told myself. "I'm fine, Mike," I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Really? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was hurt or just confused, but whatever it was, it made me feel even more uncomfortable. He had never been the type to push me like this, and I couldn't figure out why he was doing it now. "I know you are," he said quietly, "but that doesn't mean you have to do everything on your own. Sometimes, it's okay to lean on others. I've been here for a long time, and I'll always be here for you. You're part of this family." I stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. His words, his tone, they were too much, too sincere. They were crossing a line I wasn't ready to acknowledge, let alone cross myself. Mike was my stepdad. That's all he was supposed to be. But with every word he said, it felt like he was blurring the lines, moving closer to me in a way I didn't understand. "Thanks, Mike," I said stiffly, stepping back toward the door. "I should probably get to my room." Mike didn't stop me. He just nodded, his gaze still following me as I walked out of the kitchen. I could feel his eyes on me, like he was watching my every move, but I couldn't bring myself to look back. I made my way to my room, my mind racing. I hated how I was feeling. I hated how easily Mike could make me feel confused. He was just my stepdad. This shouldn't have been happening, but I couldn't stop the thoughts from flooding my mind. Every time I saw him, I felt drawn to him, even though I knew it was wrong, and that only made me feel more ashamed of myself. I couldn't figure out what to do. I wanted to ignore it, pretend like nothing had changed, but I couldn't. Later that evening, when my mom came home, the tension between Mike and me was palpable. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, though. She was busy talking about her work, about the things she had to do the next day. She was always so wrapped up in her own life, never paying attention to what was happening around her. I envied her for that, in a way. She didn't have to deal with the confusion and the guilt that I was struggling with every day. But that night, after my mom went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind unable to quiet the thoughts swirling in my head. I kept thinking about Mike, about his kindness, about the way his eyes lingered on me when he spoke. It was almost like he was waiting for me to understand something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out into the night. I needed some space, some distance from all of it. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they grew. I was trapped in a situation that felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mom's voice, but it didn't matter. I couldn't escape the growing tension between Mike and me. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that I couldn't continue pretending that everything was normal. My relationship with him had changed, and it was becoming harder to ignore the feelings that had started to surface. And deep down, I was afraid of where this would lead. The days that followed only made things worse. Every time I saw Mike, the air between us seemed thicker, charged with an intensity that I couldn't escape. I tried to keep my distance, staying in my room or out with friends, but it never seemed to work. Even when I wasn't around him, I could feel his presence in the house, like it was waiting for me to acknowledge something I wasn't ready to confront. Mike, however, didn't make it any easier to ignore. He was constantly around, always offering help, asking if I needed anything. At first, I thought I could just brush it off, tell myself he was just being a concerned stepfather. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized it wasn't just concern, it was something deeper, something personal. He didn't just want to know about my day or my homework, he wanted to know me. And that was something I wasn't used to. One evening, after dinner, Mike suggested we go for a walk. The house felt too small, too confining, and I was eager to escape the tension. I didn't say anything as I grabbed my jacket and followed him out the door. The air was cool, the streets quiet, and we walked in silence for a while. I tried to ignore the feeling that kept building up in my chest, the unease that always followed me when I was alone with him. "I've been thinking," Mike said, breaking the silence. "You've been back for a little while now, but it's clear there's a lot on your mind. I just want you to know that it's okay to talk to me if you need to." I looked at him, surprised. He'd never been like this before. Sure, he'd offered advice in passing, but this was different. This wasn't just a casual offer. It felt like a plea, a genuine invitation for me to open up. But I didn't know how to respond. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue, but they felt wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this. "I know," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've just been adjusting, you know? It's not always easy." Mike nodded, his gaze softening as he turned to face me. "I get that. College can be overwhelming. And coming back home, well, that can be tough too. But I'm here if you ever need anything, Emily. You don't have to go through it alone." His words, while meant to comfort, felt like they were edging too close to something I wasn't ready for. It was one thing for him to offer advice, but this felt different. There was a level of intimacy in his tone, in the way he looked at me, that made my heart race. I quickly turned my gaze ahead, avoiding his eyes. "Thanks," I muttered, my throat tight. "But I'm fine." "Really?" Mike didn't press further. Instead, he fell silent, walking beside me with his hands in his pockets. The tension lingered in the air, thick and heavy. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything, but nothing seemed to fit. Why was Mike being like this? Why was he suddenly so interested in my feelings, in my life? This was my stepdad, for God's sake. I had never seen him like this, and it made me feel exposed, vulnerable. We reached a small park at the end of the street, and Mike stopped. He leaned against a bench, looking out at the empty playground. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I never really had the chance to be there for you when you were younger. Your mom and I, well, we've had our struggles, and I think I've been distant because of that. But I don't want to make the same mistake again." I didn't know how to respond. The sincerity in his voice felt too personal, too raw. I had always kept him at arm's length, never letting myself get too close to him. And now he was here, opening up in a way I didn't know how to handle. "Mike, I started, but my voice faltered. What was I supposed to say to him? How could I tell him that I was starting to feel something for him that I shouldn't? Before I could finish my sentence, he turned to look at me, his gaze intense. His eyes were searching mine, almost like he was trying to read my thoughts. "Emily," he said softly, stepping closer, "you don't have to carry all this on your own. I know you've been through a lot. You don't have to do it alone." There was something in his voice, something that made me feel both comforted and scared. I didn't know what he meant, what he was offering. All I knew was that his presence was becoming too much, and I couldn't figure out how to escape it. My pulse quickened, and I took a step back, unsure of what to do. "I should go back inside," I said, my voice shaky. "It's getting late." Mike didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. "All right, but you know where I am if you need to talk." I turned quickly and walked back toward the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't deny the fact that something between Mike and me was changing, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. Every time I walked through the house, I could feel Mike's presence, whether it was in the kitchen, the living room, or just the general space we shared. It was like I couldn't escape the shift that had occurred. I had tried to bury my feelings, to tell myself that I was imagining things, but the truth was becoming undeniable. The more I tried to distance myself, the closer he seemed to get. He was always there, always watching, always offering that same quiet, almost intimate support that made my heart race and my mind spiral. He continued to ask about my day, my thoughts, my feelings, things I never thought I would share with him. There was a certain tenderness in his voice, a softness that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And each time, I would tell myself it was just concern, just him being a good stepdad. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. One evening, after dinner, Mike came into the living room while I was watching TV. He didn't sit next to me right away, but his presence loomed over me like a quiet storm. I could feel his eyes on me, and I tried to pretend I hadn't noticed, but I couldn't ignore it. The tension between us was palpable. "You've been quiet tonight," Mike said, his voice low and measured. "You okay?" I turned my head slightly, avoiding his gaze. "Yeah, I'm fine," I muttered, trying to sound casual. "Just tired." But Mike wasn't convinced. He stood there for a moment, watching me, before he finally sat down on the couch next to me. Our proximity was too close, and I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't want to acknowledge the way my body reacted to his presence, the way my pulse quickened when he was near. But there was no denying it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. "You know," he said after a brief pause, "if you ever want to talk, I'm here. About anything." I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for a response. I didn't know what to say. I had already told him I was fine, but the words didn't feel true anymore. He had been so kind, so attentive, and yet, with every passing day, the lines between us felt like they were blurring. "I know," I replied quietly, trying to brush it off. "I appreciate it, Mike. Really." But it wasn't enough. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, even though he tried to hide it. He didn't push me, but the silence between us felt heavier than it should have been. The quiet was consuming, and I found myself wanting to speak, to tell him everything I had been holding inside. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. He sighed softly, the sound of it making my heart race. "You don't have to hide from me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can tell when something's bothering you. I could feel the weight of his words in my chest, the way they hung in the air between us. And for the first time, I realized how much I had been hiding, not just from him, but from myself. I had been pretending for so long, telling myself that everything was fine, that nothing had changed. But now, I couldn't deny it anymore. Things had changed, and they had changed between us. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need some air," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Without waiting for a response, I quickly walked toward the front door, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away. The air outside was cool against my skin, but it didn't do anything to ease the heat I felt rising inside me. I walked down the street, away from the house, trying to clear my head. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the thoughts that were consuming me. I kept thinking about Mike, about the way he looked at me, the way his voice had sounded when he spoke to me, the way he had always been there, in a way that no one else had. It wasn't just concern. It was more than that, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I didn't know what this was, but I knew it was something I wasn't prepared for. After walking for what felt like hours, I found myself standing in front of a small park, staring at the empty swings swaying gently in the breeze. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. All I knew was that I couldn't go back home. Not yet. I needed more time. But as I stood there, lost in my thoughts, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was. Mike. He had followed me. My stomach twisted with a mix of dread and something else I couldn't name. "I thought you might be out here," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of concern. "You ran off pretty quickly. Are you okay?" I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at him, unsure of what to do. He was standing too close, and yet I didn't want him to leave. It was confusing. He wasn't supposed to make me feel like this. But here he was, standing in front of me, waiting for me to say something. "I don't know what's happening," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to feel." Mike stepped closer, his eyes softening as he looked at me. "You don't have to figure it out all at once. It's okay to feel confused. I'm here. I just want you to know that." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I was suffocating, caught between the desire to pull away and the urge to get closer. I didn't know how to explain this to him, and I didn't know how to explain it to myself. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against my arm. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt through me. I looked up at him, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes, something that made my breath catch in my throat. I knew we were standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't bring myself to step away. "I need to go back," I said, pulling away from his touch, my voice shaky. "I don't want to do this. Not now." Mike didn't stop me. He just nodded, his face a mixture of regret and understanding. "I won't push you, Emily," he said quietly, "but when you're ready, I'll be here." I turned and walked back toward the house, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic mess. What had just happened? What was I supposed to do now? Everything between Mike and me had changed, and I wasn't sure how to move forward.